The night smelled of spilled whiskey and rotten secrets. Behind Burke's saloon, where lantern light barely touched the walls, 2 young Apache women were tied like cattle waiting for slaughter. Their cries cut through the smoke and laughter of the front room, desperate, trembling cries that made the floorboards groan with shame. Folks drinking at the bar pretended not to hear, but one man did. A rancher named Clay, worn down by years of loss, stiffened at the sound. For him, it wasn't just noise. It was the echo of a memory he could never bury. The back room was hot, stinking of sweat and fear. Taya strained against the rope biting into her wrists, whispering prayers in her native tongue. Beside her, her younger sister Ina trembled so badly she could barely breathe. Burke, the saloon keeper, towered over them with a grin that could sour milk. He reeked of liquor and arrogance, his shadow blotting out the light. Leaning in the corner was Flint, his henchman, toying with a knife like a child with a toy. Burke's voice was low, oily. "You can't pay me in coin, then you'll pay me in flesh." Taya's heart pounded against her ribs. She lifted her chin, trying to shield Ina from his eyes, but her voice shook when she said, "Take me, just let her go." Ina's cry split the room. "No. Don't. Somebody help us." Her scream tore through the thin wooden walls and spilled into the saloon's front room. Clay had been sitting alone at a table, nursing a glass of rye, his shoulders sagging under the weight of years. His gray hair caught the lantern's glow, and the creases in his face told stories no one dared ask about. He had come only for a quiet drink and tobacco, but that scream struck him like a bullet to the chest. For one terrible heartbeat, Clay was back in another time, his daughter's voice crying for him, the night he was too late, the night the grave swallowed her future. His hand shook as he set the glass down. The piano player froze mid-note. A few drunks looked up, uneasy. Clay pushed back his chair. The floorboards groaned under his boots as he walked toward the back. The door creaked open, and what he saw made his jaw clench. Taya's shirt was torn at the shoulder, her eyes wide with despair. Ina, bound and sobbing, begged for mercy. Burke's hand clamped down on Taya's arm, and Flint's knife glittered in the lamplight. Burke snarled, "This ain't your business, rancher. Walk away." Clay didn't move. His breath came slow, steady, though his chest ached with rage. He looked at the 2 sisters, their silent plea hanging heavy in the air. Taya whispered, broken, "Please." Something inside Clay snapped. He had sworn never to draw his gun again, but promises meant nothing when the past clawed at him. His hand drifted to the worn leather of his holster. His voice came out low and steady, carrying the weight of a man who'd seen too much. "Untie them." The room froze. Flint's smirk faltered, his knife lowering an inch. Burke's grin cracked, twitching with the first hint of fear. For the first time in years, Clay's blood felt alive, and every soul in that saloon knew, if Burke didn't listen, the old rancher would kill him where he stood. The silence in that back room felt heavier than lead. Clay's hand rested firm near the butt of his revolver, his weathered face locked in a stare that could cut stone. Every man inside could feel the shift, the old rancher wasn't bluffing. Burke tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. "You think you scare me, Clay? You're one man. One man standin' against me, my crew, and half this town." Clay didn't flinch. His voice was steady, raw like gravel dragged across steel. "Untie them. Now." The command wasn't shouted. It didn't have to be. The way he said it left no space for doubt, no room for argument. It was the kind of voice men remembered long after they wished they'd obeyed. Flint, leaning in the corner, stopped twirling his knife. His smirk slipped. He had heard the stories, everybody had. Clay Colton, the rancher who'd once been quicker on the draw than any hired gun from Dodge to Abilene. A man who swore never to pull iron again, but when he did, somebody always hit the dirt. The weight of that memory hung thick in the smoke. Burke's grin cracked. His fingers twitched on Taya's arm, squeezing harder as if to prove he still had control. But Clay's revolver cleared the holster in a single smooth motion, the metallic click of the hammer echoing louder than thunder. "Let her go," Clay said, his eyes burning holes clean through Burke. For the first time, Burke's swagger faltered. He cursed, yanking at the rope until it dropped from Taya's wrists. She stumbled forward, her knees weak, arms rushing to shield Ina. Tears streaked her dirt-stained face as she pulled her little sister close. Ina sobbed into her sister's shoulder, whispering broken thanks between ragged breaths. Flint's knife clattered to the floor. He raised his hands, his cocky grin gone, replaced with the pale look of a man staring down judgment. Clay didn't lower his gun. He knew men like Burke. They didn't understand mercy, only steel. His voice was low but sharp enough to draw blood. "Get out." Burke spat on the floor, rage flashing in his eyes. "This ain't over, rancher. You'll pay for this." "Maybe," Clay replied, his revolver steady. "But not tonight." Burke shoved past, dragging Flint with him. The door slammed, rattling the thin walls. Their footsteps faded into the saloon's uneasy quiet. The piano man sat frozen, hands limp over the keys. The drunks at the bar avoided Clay's eyes, pretending to study their glasses. Everyone in that room knew what had just happened, they had witnessed a ghost rise out of his grave. Clay holstered the revolver and exhaled, slow and heavy, as if he'd been holding his breath for 10 years. He turned to the sisters. Taya's voice broke, her throat raw. "Why? Why would you help us? You don't even know us." Clay met her gaze, his face shadowed by pain he couldn't bury. "Because someone should have helped my daughter. But no one did." The words dropped between them like stones in a well. No one spoke after. The sisters clung to each other, still trembling, their tears soaking into torn cloth. Clay adjusted his hat, his jaw tight, then motioned toward the door. "Come on," he said. "It ain't safe here." The three of them stepped out into the cool night, the dirt road stretching dark and silent. The saloon doors swung behind them, and with every step, Clay knew, Burke would be back. And next time, he wouldn't come alone. The ride out of town was quiet, the kind of quiet that hums in your bones. The moon rode high, throwing silver across the dry land. Clay led his horse slow, careful, while Taya and Ina clung to each other on the saddle. Behind them, the saloon's lantern light faded, but Burke's parting threat still clung to the air like smoke. Clay's ranch sat on the edge of the prairie, weathered and tired, but still standing. The fence leaned, the barn sagged, and the fields lay mostly bare, years of drought had eaten them alive. But the old place was more than shelter. It was a piece of Clay's soul, scarred and stubborn, refusing to give up. He swung down from his horse and helped the sisters to the ground. Ina's knees buckled, she hadn't stopped shaking since Burke's hand first touched her arm. Taya steadied her, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders, eyes sharp even through the tears. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and dust. A single lantern glowed on the table, its light soft against the worn walls. Clay filled tin cups with water and set down a plate of bread, hard but edible. The sisters ate in silence at first, too starved to waste time with words. Clay sat across from them, his broad frame shadowed by the flicker of the lantern. He studied them the way a man studies weather, knowing storms when he sees them. Finally, Taya broke the silence. Her voice was rough but steady. "Why do this for us, Clay? You don't know us. You didn't owe us a thing." Clay leaned back, the chair groaning under his weight. His eyes lingered on the flame dancing in the lantern glass. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice worn thin by regret, he muttered, "Because too many times I stayed quiet. Too many times I let the bad men have their way. And people I loved paid the price." Taya's gaze softened, though her body stayed tense. She could see it, the shadow behind his eyes, the wound no bullet had made but still bled. Ina whispered, her hands clutching the tin cup. "Are we safe now?" Clay looked at her, the same way he once looked at his little girl, and felt that old pain twist again. He shook his head slowly. "Safe? Not hardly. Burke's the kind of man who don't forget shame. And he won't forgive it." The wind rattled the shutters. Outside, coyotes called across the plains, sharp and mournful. The sound made Ina flinch. Clay's jaw tightened. "Crow's been in Burke's pocket for years. That badge he wears don't stand for justice, it stands for Burke's coin. If Burke comes back, he won't just bring Flint. He'll bring the law." The sisters exchanged a glance. Fear flickered in Ina's eyes, but in Taya's, a spark of something harder, anger, maybe, or the faint beginning of resolve. Clay pushed back from the table, stood, and adjusted his hat. "You two stay here tonight. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we'll figure what's next." Taya studied him, her voice low. "And when Burke comes?" Clay turned toward the window, looking out at the wide, empty land. The moon lit the prairie like a ghost's lantern. His reply was soft, but sharp enough to cut through the fear. "Then he'll find out this ranch ain't as empty as it looks." The morning sun bled red across the prairie, sharp and restless. Clay had been up before dawn, saddling his horse with hands that moved slow but sure. He left the sisters at the ranch with strict words: "Stay inside. If trouble comes, head for the root cellar and don't open that door." Taya wanted to argue, but the set of Clay's jaw told her it was useless. She only nodded, pulling Ina close, her eyes burning with both fear and pride. Clay rode into town like a shadow cutting across the land. Folks along the street paused when they saw him coming. Some tipped their hats, others turned away. Everyone knew the air was different now, heavy with the promise of a reckoning. The saloon was alive with noise when he pushed the doors open. Smoke swirled around him, whiskey stung the air, and dice clattered on tables. But when Burke spotted him, the noise thinned to a nervous hush. Burke leaned back in his chair, boots propped up on the table, his grin as crooked as a rusted nail. Beside him, Flint stood with arms crossed, jaw twitching, eyes itching for a fight. And sitting at the table with them was Deputy Crow, his badge glinting in the lantern light. "Well, look here," Burke drawled loud enough for the whole room to hear. "The rancher thinks he's a hero now. Paid my debt last night with a gun barrel. Did you think that makes those Apache girls free?" A few men chuckled, but most kept their eyes down. Clay stepped further into the room, his boots heavy on the floorboards. His voice cut through the smoke, calm but sharp as barbed wire. "They are free. And if you ever lay a hand on them again, you'll answer to me." Deputy Crow leaned forward, tapping the badge on his vest. His smirk was slick, oiled with arrogance. "You talk big, Clay. But you forget, I carry the law in this town. If Burke says those girls owe him, then they owe him. That's how it works." The words hung like a noose in the room. Dice stopped rolling. Cards lay flat on tables. Even the bartender froze, rag in hand. Clay's eyes never left Crow's. He spoke slow, each word heavy as iron. "Law ain't a badge. Law is justice. And justice don't belong to men like you." For a long moment, silence pressed down on the saloon. Men shifted in their chairs, women glanced nervously toward the door. The storm was close, everyone could feel it. Burke's grin widened again, sharp and poisonous. "Then I guess we'll see who this town belongs to." Clay didn't flinch. His hand rested near his hip, but he didn't draw. Not yet. Instead, he turned just enough to look at the room, the farmers, the ranch hands, the drifters who had watched men like Burke bleed the town dry for years. "Remember this moment," Clay said, voice low but carrying. "When Burke comes for blood, you'll have to decide which side you're on. His, or what's right." The words lodged deep in every ear. Some men nodded faintly, others stared at the floor. But in that smoky silence, the line was drawn. Clay tipped his hat, turned, and walked back out into the sun. Behind him, Burke's laughter followed, cruel and certain. But Clay knew what he had seen in the crowd, fear cracking, courage stirring. The fight was coming, and the town would no longer be able to hide. By midday, the prairie sky turned white with heat, the kind that pressed down heavy on a man's shoulders. Clay stood on the porch of his ranch, rifle resting across his arms, his eyes on the horizon. He'd felt the tremor in his bones since morning. Trouble was coming, and sure enough, a plume of dust rose in the distance. The riders came hard, the sound of hooves like war drums beating against the earth. Burke led the pack, his face twisted with triumph. Beside him rode Flint, jaw set, pistol strapped high on his hip. And in the middle, flashing that tarnished badge like it was a crown, sat Deputy Crow. Behind them, half a dozen hired men rode with grim faces, eager for coin and chaos. Inside the cabin, Taya and Ina stood near the window, their fear as raw as the desert wind. Ina's hands clutched her sister's arm, eyes wide. "He brought the law," she whispered. Clay didn't turn. His voice was steady, iron strong. "Stay behind me. If things go bad, you know where the root cellar is." The sisters exchanged a glance. Neither moved. For too long, they'd run, bent under the weight of men like Burke. Tonight, they were done running. The riders pulled up just short of the porch, dust swirling around them. Burke pointed straight at Clay, his voice carrying sharp as a whip. "There he is. The thief. The liar. A man hidin' debt dodgers and criminals." Crow lifted his chin, badge gleaming. "By law, those Apache girls belong to Burke until their debt is paid. Step aside, Clay. Don't make this worse than it has to be." Clay raised his rifle, barrel steady, his face carved from stone. "The only thing that belongs to Burke is his shame. And I'll be damned if I let you two cowards write the law to fit your pockets." The crowd had gathered, neighbors, farmers, townsfolk drawn by the thunder of hooves. They stood at the edges of the yard, watching, holding their breath. Some carried pitchforks, others rifles. Most carried nothing but the weight of years spent silent. Burke sneered, trying to rattle them. "This town's always belonged to me. Always will." And then Taya stepped forward. Her voice trembled at first, but it grew stronger with every word. "We are not the only ones you've hurt. We're just the ones still alive to say it." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Heads lifted. Eyes met. And something shifted. Clay's voice thundered like a storm rolling in. "You've all seen their bruises. You've all felt his grip on this town. But justice ain't fear, and law ain't for sale. Today you decide, do you stand with Burke, or do you stand with what's right?" The silence broke. One man stepped forward, rifle in hand. Then another. A woman pulled her son close and shouted, "Enough of Burke." Voices rose, timid at first, then stronger, until the crowd swelled with defiance. Burke's face drained of color. Flint's hand twitched at his pistol, but he froze when he realized a dozen barrels were now leveled his way. Crow's smirk wavered, his badge suddenly nothing more than a piece of tin. For the first time in years, the town wasn't cowering. It was standing tall. Clay lowered his rifle just enough to let them know he trusted the crowd now. But his voice stayed sharp as ever. "Burke, Flint, Crow, you'll answer today. Not just to me. To all of them." The riders shifted nervously in their saddles. The tide had turned, and Burke knew it. This was no longer his town. The standoff broke like a storm. Shouts echoed, boots pounded, and suddenly it wasn't just Clay standing against Burke, it was the whole town. Men and women who'd been quiet too long surged forward, their anger spilling out like a river finally breaking its dam. Burke's eyes darted wild, his sneer faltering. "You'll regret this," he spat, but his words had no bite now. His rein had cracked in front of everyone. Flint reached for his gun, but before steel cleared leather, 3 rifles leveled his way. His hand froze mid-air, his bravado gone. He dropped the pistol, the thud loud in the tense air. Deputy Crow tried to bluff, badge lifted high. "Stand down. I'm the law here." But the crowd roared back, voices tangled in fury and truth. "You ain't the law. You're bought and paid for. Your badge don't mean a damn thing." A ranch hand ripped the badge from Crow's vest, tossing it in the dirt where it belonged. Crow stumbled back, pale, his authority stripped bare before the people he'd betrayed. Clay stepped down off the porch, rifle still in his grip, though now the crowd was the one carrying the weight. He moved slow, deliberate, every step the mark of a man who'd waited years for this reckoning. "Bind, Clay said. His voice was calm, steady, like he was ordering fence posts cut, not justice carried out. Hands reached out, ropes looped tight. Burke and Flint were tied, curses spilling from their mouths but falling flat against the tide of townsfolk pressing close. Crow's wrists were bound too, his protests thin and desperate. The 3 of them, once so sure of their power, now looked small, just men cornered by truth. Taya and Inna stepped forward, their eyes wet, but their backs straighter than they'd ever stood. Inna whispered, voice trembling but strong, "Are we safe now?" Clay glanced at her, his weathered face softening. He shifted his eyes to the crowd, then back to the sisters. "Safe enough," he said. "Because it ain't just me anymore. It's all of us." The sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the yard as Burke, Flint, and Crow were marched off to face judgment outside the town they'd poisoned for so long. The people followed, their voices steady, no longer afraid. For the first time in years, Clay felt the weight in his chest ease. The rifle in his hand suddenly seemed lighter, though the scars in his heart still burned. On the porch, Taya touched his arm. "Why did you fight for us, Clay? You had nothing to gain." He looked out across the prairie, the horizon bathed in gold, and answered with words as plain as the land itself. "Because a man's worth ain't measured by what he keeps. It's measured by what he stands for." The wind carried his words across the open field, wrapping them in dust and sunlight. The town had found its backbone again, and Clay knew his daughter's memory would rest easier tonight. Final message. Out here on the frontier, justice don't come easy. It takes grit, sacrifice, and the courage to stand when every bone in you says walk away. Clay's fight wasn't just about 2 sisters or 1 ranch, it was about showing that one person's choice can stir a whole town to rise. So remember this, friend, courage ain't the absence of fear, it's doing what's right when fear is all you feel. And sometimes, that's enough to change everything.